السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد. يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في كلامه المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قد خلت سنن من قبلكم فسيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, this verse that I have recited in front of you from Surah Al-Imran, Surah number 3, verse number 137, Allah informs us, instructs us, قَدْ خَلَتْ سُنَنٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ. Many societies, nations, communities have gone before you. Siru, fasiru fil ard. Walk, roam, travel the earth. Fanduru, and look. كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. The end result of those who denied Allah, who rejected Allah. Look at the ruins where they once used to live hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. In essence, Allah Azza wa Jal is asking us to learn from history, to learn from previous nations, and not to make the same mistakes that previous nations have made. And when we look at the history of the United States, let's look and try to learn from the history of this young country, because the history is very young. This nation is very young, does not have centuries or millenniums of history like some of the countries that we come from. I have prayed in masajids, and I'm sure you have, which are 700 years old, 800 years old. But we have in front of us US history, and you have just eaten a Thanksgiving turkey. So it is very relevant that we learn a little bit about the early settlers who came. People, of course, the indigenous people have been living here for 10,000 to 20,000 years. But we're speaking of the European settlers. Christopher Columbus is known to be the first to have discovered America in 1492. By the way, that date, 1492, should be seared into our memory, because that is the year that the Muslims lost Spain. The last stronghold, Granada, where Muslims were kicked out in 1492. And that is the same year Christopher Columbus discovered America. Anyhow, fast forward 100 years or so, settlers began arriving and making colonies, permanent colonies. Jamestown, 1607, Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts in 1620. 1620, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Jamestown, Virginia. Fast forward 100 years or so, you have the War of Independence, where the 13 British colonies that were settled here on the East Coast, they decided to throw off the yoke of imperialism. They were ruled by the royal crown, the British. Imagine, I read someplace recently that approximately every 6 days, there is some country in the world that is celebrating its independence from the British. That's how vast their empire was. Known as the War of Independence. 1776 is when the colonies declared their independence from the crown. George Washington, the first president and also the chief commander of the armed forces of the colonies, he led the army of resistance against the British. This army of George Washington was known as the Rag and Tag Army. Why was it called the Rag and Tag Army? They did not have proper uniforms like the British with their bright red coats. They did not have proper training. They did not have uniforms at all. They were peasants and farmers who just took up arms against the British. They did not have shoes at times, and they had to wrap rags around their feet. And they would walk, this army of George Washington, known as the Rag and Tag Army, would walk in the snow. And because their feet was bleeding, there would be blood marks in the snow. Now, I would like to draw your attention to an expedition that took place during the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's mentioned in Bukhari, ghazwatu 𝙁𝙊𝙇𝙇𝙊𝙒, the army or the expedition of rags and tags. Why? Because the Sahaba, they say, "Kun kharajna ma'an Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam fi ghazwatin, wa kunna sittatu nafarin, ba'irun na'taqibu fi, baynana ba'irun na'taqibu." There was only one camel for every 6 people, and we would take turns on that camel. 6 people taking turns. So many of them had to walk in the desert sand. And they did not have shoes either. So what did the Sahaba do? You guessed it, they tied rags around their feet. And that is why this expedition is known as the expedition of rags. Ghazwatu 𝙁𝙊𝙁𝙁. And the Sahaba say our feet were bleeding, and we tied rags around our feet. The comparison that I'm not trying to make a comparison between the Sahaba and George Washington's army. I am making a comparison between the sacrifice of the two. That to achieve anything in life, you have to give sacrifice. You have to sacrifice and work hard, whether it is for the independence of a country or whether it is for Jannah, for the hereafter, for the sake of Allah. Without hard work, without sacrifice, we expect results. We expect the fruits to drop in our lap. It does not happen that way. That is not the sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal. Let's move on. There was a person in that War of Independence, an American spy. His name was Nathan Hale. He was known as the first American spy. He was caught by the British, and he was executed because that is the punishment for a spy, Nathan Hale. His statue, by the way, is in Washington, D.C. in front of the DOJ, Department of Justice building, Nathan Hale. He was executed in 1778 by the British. You know what his last sentence was as he was being hanged? "My only regret is that I have only one life to lose for my country." This is Nathan Hale's statement. Now, let's go back to the lives of Sahaba. In the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, during his Khilafah, an expedition went. And the Amir of that expedition was Abdullah bin Hudhafa radiallahu anhu. And they were captured and taken prisoners. Abdullah bin Hudhafa and his fellow Muslim Sahaba soldiers. The king, Christian, said, "Hallaka anta nassara." Would you become a Christian? I will give you part of my kingdom. Abdullah bin Hudhafa radiallahu anhu replied, "In a'taytani jami'a ma tamlikuhu wa jami'a ma tamlikul Arab la arji'u an dini Muhammadin tarfata ayn." If you give me your entire kingdom and the entire kingdom of the Arabs, I will not turn away from the deen of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for a blink of an eye. Blink of an eye. Imagine if you could own this world, if you just turned away from Islam for a blink of an eye, blink. He said, no, not even for a blink of an eye. Then he said, okay. He ordered that a hot pot of water be boiled, and they would be put into the hot boiling water. That was the form of execution. Abdullah bin Hudhafa, being the Amir, he was brought out first to be put in this hot boiling water. He started to cry. The soldiers took him back to the king, thinking maybe he had a change of heart. So the king said, "Ma abkak, what is making you cry? I had given you that option, and that option still stands. You can become a Christian, and I will spare your life." He said, "No, that's not why I'm crying. I am crying because I only have one life to give for Allah. Ashtahi أن يكون شعرة في عدد شعرة في جسدي نفس حتى تلقى في الله. My desire is that I should have as many lives as the number of hairs on my body, so I could give each one by one for the sake of Allah. Again, I am not comparing Nathan Hale to Abdullah bin Hudhafa radiyallahu an. One was a disbeliever, one was a believer, a Sahabi. But I am comparing the zeal of sacrifice. Both had the zeal to sacrifice. One for his country, Nathan Hale, I only regret that I have one life to lose. And Abdullah bin Hudhafa, for his sacrifice was for Allah Azza wa Jal. By the way, this Christian king was so impressed, he said, okay, kiss my forehead and I will spare your life. He said, what about the lives of my companions? He said, their lives will also be spared. He said, okay, if that's the case, then Abdullah bin Hudhafa kissed the forehead of this Christian king. But he didn't feel quite right. So when he came back to Medina with his companions, and Umar radiallahu anhu was told of what happened, Umar radiallahu anhu, to make him feel better, asked Abdullah bin Hudhafa to sit on the mimbar in Masjid al-Nabawi and ordered all the Sahaba to kiss the forehead of Abdullah bin Hudhafa. So these are lessons we can learn. A zeal to sacrifice, the desire to work hard to achieve our goals, and to sacrifice what may come, whatever may come our way. We have to overcome that hurdle and achieve our goals. Without that, khiyalastu wa mahalastu wa junun. Without that, if you are hoping for results, without sacrifice, without hard work, it is called your fantasy, your imagination, and impossibility. Now moving on, what else can we learn from the early settlers who came to this country besides hard work and sacrifice? Yes, we are enjoying the fruits. In this country, we are enjoying the fruits of their hard work. You came at a time when the fruit was ripe, and you are picking the fruits off the tree. A lot of hard work went into building this country and to bring it where it is today. What else? When the early settlers came, they missed the countries of their origin. Maybe like many of us, when we first come to this country, we are also somewhat homesick. They called it the old world, England, Portuguese, Spain, where they came. And they had the opportunity to name the towns. So guess what they named? Many of the towns on the East Coast, if you haven't noticed, are named after towns in England. You have Baltimore, Birmingham, Oxford, Portland. These are all towns in England. It's like you were here, you came to Utah and you had the option to name this city. And you looked at the mountains and you said, oh, I remember Pakistan. I'm going to name this city Islamabad. Or I'm going to name this city Baghdad. Because that's exactly what happened. Many of the towns. As a matter of fact, Rhode Island, the state, Rhode Island, this is interesting. You know what it's named after? It's named after Island of Rhodes. Rhode, R-H-O-D-E, Island of Rhodes. What was Island? Island of Rhodes is the island off of Greece that the Ottoman Empire conquered during the time of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1552. Island of Rhodes. They lost the Island of Rhodes, the Christians, the Crusades. And Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire kicked them out. And he conquered the Island of Rhodes in 1552. And what did they name the state? Rhode Island. Do you know where I'm getting to? Isn't something similar happening to us today? We don't have the option of naming towns, but aren't we losing territory in the old world, in the Muslim world? And don't we have an opportunity to do something different here? On one hand, they were homesick and they missed the old world, Urubba. But on the other hand, they said, we are not going to make the same mistakes that our forefathers have made. We are going to do something different. What mistakes did our forefathers make in England? This is what the early settlers thought. They said, well, for one, there was no separation of church and state. The Church of England, for example, did not allow dissension. Everyone in England had to follow the Church of England. The Church of England persecuted, with the backing of the government, of course, the monarchy, persecuted Catholics and other sects of Christianity. So many of the early settlers, the Puritans, the Pilgrims as they are called, were running away from the Church of England. So they said, you know what? Back home in the old world, in England, the government, the monarchy, used to support the Church of England. And because of that, any minority was what? Persecuted by the monarchy. In this new land, Americas, we are going to have separation of church and state. The government will not support any sect of Christianity or any religion. See how they were doing things different? Because why? They did not want to make the mistakes of their forefathers in the old world. What else? They said, in the old world, this was the new world, America. In the old world, in England and other European countries, they had monarchies. We are not going to have a monarchy. We are going to have a democracy where people can vote for their leaders. George Washington was given the option of calling himself emperor. Do you think he liked that term? He was given the option of calling himself the elected majesty. He didn't even want the word majesty in his title. He chose the title president. Different from what they were doing in England. Because they learned from their mistakes. They did not want to repeat those same mistakes. Stay with me. Do you know where I'm getting at? We have a unique opportunity. Such an opportunity does not arise even once in 1,000 years. We have a unique opportunity to do something different in this country. We don't have the opportunity to name towns, but we have the opportunity to not make the mistakes that our forefathers have made. If they did not have separation of church and state, the early settlers, if they had monarchies in this country, then who would be suffering? Hundreds of years from we would be suffering. If we choose to make the same mistakes that our forefathers have made in India, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, if we choose to make those same mistakes, then our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will suffer. What mistakes? Let me give you one example. Marriage. Many of the rituals surrounding marriage are part of the Hindu culture. We, from the subcontinent, I'll come to the Arab community in a bit. You are not off the hook either. In the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, many of these rituals have to do with the Hindu culture. That's why from a religious point of view, we are Muslims. But culturally, we are Hindus. Culturally, we are Hindus. Yes, our culture is no different than the Hindu culture. Mehendi, Sanchak, Dholki are all Hindu rituals that have nothing to do with Islam. If you choose to have Mehendi and Sanchak and Dholi, then your great-grandchildren will also do it. You have the opportunity to stop it now. You have a clean slate. Let me give another example. The Chicago fire of 1871, the greatest tragic fire in the history of the United States. 17,500 buildings burnt down. From October 8th to October 10th, the fire lasted 3 days non-stop. The fire of 1871. More than 100,000 residential homes burned. And over 2,000 acres, 3 square miles, burned. Downtown Chicago, like downtown Solid, downtown Chicago, burned to ashes. Over 300 people died in that fire. But if you ask Chicagoans, they will say that is the best thing that ever happened. Why? Because once that fire burned everything to ashes, they had a clean slate. Then a call went out to all the architects of America and around the world to come and design a city. It is the dream of any city planner to start from where? Scratch. And build a city of your dreams. That's why Chicago, even today, has one of the most beautiful downtowns. And of course, architects came from around the world. They had a clean slate. They could start fresh. Before the fire of 1871, in downtown Chicago, you had a slaughterhouse next to a pub, next to a home, next to a factory, next to a commercial building. Now they had zoning and planning, beautiful planning. Our countries are burning down, literally. Don't count these 2-3 Gulf countries that are the size of Sandy in West Jordan. The majority of the Muslim countries are burning down. We have a unique opportunity to do something different. We have a clean slate and not make the mistakes of our forefathers. Those cultural practices that have nothing to do with Islam and have everything to do with the Hindu culture. And the reason why they do it is because of a value system. You ask me what is so wrong with Mehndi and Sanchak and Doli. I will tell you, it is based on a value system. For them, a daughter is a burden. So they are genuinely happy when their daughter is married. Why? Because a burden has been relieved. For a Muslim, a daughter is rahmah. The saddest day of my life would be when my daughter gets married. Is that something to celebrate? Why would you feed people on the saddest day of your life? Unless you're happy. You feed people and you celebrate when you are happy. Yes, there is a sigh of relief. The father takes a sigh of relief because he has fulfilled a responsibility. But he's not happy. That's why in Islam, a woman, a girl's side does not have to spend a single penny. As a matter of fact, the food that is served at the wedding that the girl's side spend is known as begharti ka khana. Ta'amud dayyuth, the food of a cuckold. Why are you celebrating? What do you have to celebrate? And also, according to the Hindu culture, they do not have any share for their daughter in inheritance. For us, the daughter has a share in the inheritance. The father will continue to spend on her, and she has a share in the father's wealth when he dies. For them, because this is the only one expense, that's why they spend so much on the dowry. That's why they spend so much at the wedding, because this is the one and only time they are going to spend on their daughter. They're not going to spend ever again. So if you support that value system, which I'm sure you don't, then why celebrate a daughter's wedding? The Arab community, alhamdulillah, they have this part right. The girl's side does not have to spend. The boy's side spends. But there's other mistakes. They have done away with the walima. Where's the walima? Show me the walima. Where's the walima? They emphasize the white wedding, the fancy wedding. Walima is the sunnah. Bring that sunnah back to life. Awlim walau bishatin. and the boy's side will spend. Otherwise, if we do these Hindu rituals, then our grandchildren will continue to do them. And if we put a stop to it now, because of the clean slate we have, and because of not making the mistakes that our forefathers made in the old world, we have that option. We have that option. It's a unique opportunity. If we put a stop to it now, then our grandchildren will not practice it. Otherwise, if we practice it, then it will continue. And we have brought that filth, that luggage, that extra baggage from the old world. So may Allah Azza wa Jal enable us to practice. Yes. May Allah Azza wa Jal enable us to differentiate between Islam and culture. If we don't know, we can ask. Before we do anything, we should ask, is this part of Islam? Does this support the values of Islam? Does this support Islamic values? Is this a cultural practice? May Allah Azza wa Jal help us. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. Please pray your sunnah.